Hello Year 10, welcome to lesson 12 of our Living in Nazi Germany course. Now then, to address the elephant in the room. Yeah, you've had a haircut. Anyway, yes, today's lesson we have finished chapter 2. So chapter 1 was how Hitler consolidated his power as dictator and went from chancellor to dictator, and I had an incredibly long video, and I apologize to all of you who've had to sit through that. Talking you through that in a single slide with a series of tasks attached. So that was relatively simple. We then moved on and we did some work on Nazi control, and we did the triangle, and we just finished the triangle. The last two lessons were about the weakness of the opposition, which was the super secret fourth part of that triangle. It also included some stuff on support at the top. We did terror, which was over this side, and we did propaganda, which would, I can't do this, that side here. There we go. So there we go. We've done the 3 points, and you've done the bit in the middle, which is the weakness of the opposition. Together, they ensure that the Nazis stay in power for 12 years. So you've got a fairly developed and highly functioning way of looking at how the Nazis kept power. In an essay, you would not be asked to tackle more than 2 of those at any given moment. The exam board are obsessed with the idea of terror and propaganda being the bedrock on which everything else sits. So you don't have to worry too much about support, and you don't have to worry too much about the weakness of the opposition. If you remember, when it comes to essays, you only need 4 specific examples, or more than 4 specific examples, but 4 specific areas you can explain with examples to get full marks. And this is where I'm going to go today. On the Show My Homework task, you'll have seen that I've put 2 questions, a 7-mark question, question 6, and an essay question. And I've chosen a question 8 very deliberately. That way there's no choice, and it's just easy as 8, 7, 6, going backwards. You've already done a 15-mark answer, a question 7, which I've asked you to submit. Thank you to those of you who've done that already, and I'm hoping to see the rest of them very soon. This will provide us with 3 full questions. You'll have a question 7, a question 6, a question 7, and then a question 8 at the end. You'll have a full 40-mark set of answers. This will allow us to get our first feel for how well these lessons are going, how well you are doing at home, and our first ability to spread across the entirety of Year 10 and work out what's happening between different sets and between different bits of support. That's the theory behind it. That's the thinking. You are now fully inculcated into how things are going. So it's a short video, you'll be glad to know today. And we're going to be talking, there we go. We're going to be talking about this document. Now, you've seen this document already, I hope. If you haven't, pause the video now, go back and have it open and have a look before we go any further. So pause now. Okay, I'm going to assume that if you're seeing this part of the video, you have paused it, you've gone back, you've had a look at the documentation. Yes, Nathan, I'm talking to you. So this is the 2 questions. Here they are, question 6 and question 8. You've already done a question 7. Question 6 is from the 2018 exam paper, the one we would have used as a mock, but there's little point now because we're not going to. I mean, we might still do a mock, but we're not going to use the 2018 paper. We would have used the 2019 paper, and then next year in Year 11, use the 2020 paper to take you through the Year 11 mocks. But for obvious reasons, there haven't been exams this year, so there won't be a 2020 paper. So I figured 2018 was fair game. 2018's paper, and I nicked 2 questions from it. Question 6 and question 8. It says here, answer questions 6 and 7. I apologise, I have not got rid of that. Well done me. So it says, what can source A tell us about Hitler and the Nazi Party in January 1933? This is a reference to Hitler's consolidation of power. It's a reference to how the ideology of the Nazi Party was personified and shown through Hitler's speeches. It says, use the source in your own knowledge to support your answer. Now, what you must not do is take this at face value. What the exam board have tried to do is make that obvious. This is an extract from Hitler's speech. This is Hitler, Adolf Hitler. I have played you him speaking. I have commentated over the top of Triumph of the Will. By now you should know that Hitler doesn't say a great deal. What he does say doesn't make a great deal of sense if you start trying to analyze it. It works because of the moment. So this radio broadcast, the appeal to the German people, is obviously going to have flaws. Therefore, it cannot tell us much factual based on its content. When Hitler rails against communism, you know that Germany was not communist before the Nazis took over. I hope I've told you that they were a democracy. You know that a national government to restore German people to unity and mind was an appeal. It was an emotional appeal. This will not tell you the facts of Germany. But the question doesn't ask you about the facts of Germany. The question asks you very specifically about the facts to do with Hitler and the Nazi Party. You should be able to link this to those three areas, Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer, that were on that Nazi ideology. If you're really clever, you'll be able to link it to the violence and the legal methods that Hitler and the Nazis are going to use to consolidate Hitler's power as dictator, because he kind of spells that out. So there are two options. Link it to ideology, and you've got three ready-made points to run with. All you've got to do is link them to the text. You won't find all three, don't worry about that. Or link them to what the Nazis are about to do to consolidate Hitler's power. The Marx scheme, remember, says you only really need one well-supported inference based on purpose, message, audience, or receipt. Receipt is how well it's received and whether or not it works. And you know enough knowledge to talk through one of those based on its provenance, the prove Nancy, the bit in bold at the top, and you know enough to develop that with quotes from the source and things that you know. I've given you all the hints you really need. I'm not going to tell you the answer. The point is for you to have a go. There are multiple answers. They will all work. Please don't worry. The next question, question 8, is an essay question. And I said at the top of this piece that for Nazi control, the exam board are obsessed with splitting between terror and propaganda, which makes a lot of sense. We spent most of our time talking about those two areas. Support and opposition came together in a single 2-lesson thing. So you should be aware that terror took a while, propaganda took a while, and you have loads of stuff on both. You might even have a view about which is more important, and that view might be different to mine. You might have a view that they're equally important. That's also fine. It's okay, whatever way you go. It's an essay. The question says, terror was more important than propaganda in controlling people in Nazi Germany between 1933 and 1939. Now, if you're really, really up for this and you want a fully sophisticated essay, each paragraph will take that as its theme, and you will say how this example of propaganda is more important than this example of terror. And then the next paragraph will be, this example of propaganda is more important than this example of terror. Then your next paragraph might be, this example of terror is more important than this example of propaganda. Do you see where I'm going with this? So that each paragraph has two examples, one from terror, one from propaganda, and you compare them. You might say that one's more important than the other. You might say that they are of equal importance, or you might say that they only work together. All of those are perfectly acceptable, and you can mix them. How many paragraphs do you need in an essay? Of course, it's 4. You need 4 paragraphs. You have an introduction, then you have your 4 paragraphs, then you have your conclusion. What do you put in your introduction? It's one of the hardest things to do. How do you start an essay? Ideally, you start with your judgment, and you say, if I was making this up, and this is a made-up answer, you are free to write whatever answer you wish. My made-up answer is, propaganda was more important than terror. And I can prove this in the following 4 ways. I could talk about whisper messages. I could talk about increasing the efficiency of terror by making people fear it more with the climate of fear created by the Gestapo. It was more important in terms of the importance placed on it by the Nazis themselves. Goebbels' office was closer to Hitler's. Sorry, that's not a piece of information I've given you. I've just pulled that from my knowledge. However, terror was also important in maintaining the fact that any opponents to the Nazis were too scared to function. There we go. I've just made that up off the top of my head. Is it my considered opinion? Of course not. I don't expect your essay to be a considered opinion beyond having thought about it and thought about where you're going. So you might want your introduction to be one of the last things you write, or just start with an introduction and come back and change it when you know what you're doing. That's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly fine, especially if you're doing it on word processing document, which is why I usually say do it on a computer. That said, I'm painfully aware that not all of you will have the ability to write it on a computer. So if you wish to write it by hand, please feel free. All I would suggest is that you take the time to draft it, plan it, and if necessary, rewrite from the beginning once you know what's going on if you make errors of structure or errors of judgment. Spelling errors, just cross them out and carry on. I'm meaning if you've got an order and it doesn't quite work, I'm meaning, oh, I wish I'd done that the other way around. Do it the other way around. It's okay. Take your time. Or take as much time as you can. I appreciate you've got a lot of things on. But redrafting by hand is a perfectly acceptable thing. I don't advise that at school because when you're in school for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, and you've got loads of homework, you've got precious little time. Use a word processor, and then you can move things around and just highlight and drag. But this is different, and some of you work better by doing things by hand. So do things by hand. Take your time. There is a good chance that we'll meet face to face at some point, and at that point, you might only just have finished this. That is perfectly acceptable. All I ask is if you do it by hand, take a picture of it so I can read it. Check the photograph before you upload it. It's a digital photograph. You can delete it and try again. Take your time on that one as well. Frame it properly. If it needs multiple photographs on a sheet of paper because you feel that your level of zoom isn't good enough, please be my guest. It's fine. I'll deal with it. If I've got 6 images to read through, I'll read through 6 images. Please don't feel you have to do it all in one image. You don't. You really don't. But all of this is stylistic. The point is 4 paragraphs, an introduction to set out your judgment, and at the end, a conclusion that draws everything together. It's not a summary. You don't have to say again what you have done. You bring it all together. So if you're being clever, you might have 3 paragraphs that go along the lines of terror was more important than propaganda because this example and that example. Terror was more important than propaganda again because this example, that example. Terror was more important than propaganda again because this example, that example. But propaganda was more important than terror because this example, that example. In conclusion, I believe the most important thing, never put I in an exam. I failed there already because I'm doing it from the top of my head. I'll try again. Overall, propaganda was more important than terror. Wait, what? But sir, you just had 3 paragraphs going the other way around. How could you possibly do that? Says I. This is how a conclusion works. Propaganda is more important than terror because although this example, that example, this example, this final example shows that they were based upon the power of propaganda. And without propaganda providing that underpinning, terror would have failed. Bingo. I've just weighed an essay by using the last thing I said. You don't have to do it that way. You don't have to be clever. It can be 2 verses 2. It can be 3 verses 1, and the 3 verses 1 is the side you come down on. I'm just saying there are sophisticated options available to you. You can just go, oh yeah, there are 3 examples of terror being more important than propaganda. Only 1 example of propaganda being more important than terror. Therefore, terror is more important than propaganda in maintaining Nazi control. And that will still get you full marks. Just saying. It'll still work, provided you've got the backup. So the conclusion is just there, not as a summary, but to draw together the essay and remind us of that judgment you made at the beginning. Essentially, if I may make this less than professional, you go, this is what I think, here's why I think it, oh look, I was right. And that is perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I've also included the mark schemes. Now they're generic. I haven't included examples or exemplars for you to pull on. That isn't to try and make life harder for you. It just means you can print out this mark scheme and it will work for literally any question. Whereas if I gave it examples, it would only work for one. And then it gets in the way of you using it for multiple questions. And I understand that I've been you. So the question 6 generic mark scheme, which I think I've talked about a fair amount now for the 7-mark answer, works like this. Level 1 is a description of the source or making valid inferences without reference to the inquiry in the question. So the question is asking you, what does it tell you about Hitler and the Nazi Party? And you tell me what it tells you about Germany, or what it tells you about communism, or what it tells you about, I don't know, today's world. Oh, it's very like what Boris Johnson said in the latest coronavirus briefing. These are all perfectly valid things, valid inferences. You are drawing useful information. It's just not answering the question. Also, anything that just tells me what the source says. The source says this, and then it says this, and this means this. You're right. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not answering the question that's been set, so you're stuck in level 1. Level 2 is where you make inferences based on content. And this is well, I'll say the easiest. It's the first step of making inferences. So you say, well, he says this, which means this. Or rather, he means this, and I can tell he means this because he says these words. And this, in context, means this. Brilliant. That means you're probably going to get up to 5 marks. And that's how it works. I think I've got a misprint there. Perhaps going 4 marks. Oh, yeah. Sorry. You've got to support it with quote and contextual knowledge. If you only support by quote, then you don't get full marks. It's not a misprint. It's just me not reading my own mark scheme. Level 3 is reserved for inferences provenance, the prove Nancy. Who and when and why the source was written. You can call it purpose. What was it trying to do? What did the source want you, as the reader of the source, to do about it? Now, I say reader rather than viewer, because in the actual exams, in the heat of exam battle, for want of a better phrase, the exam board have only released written sources. They have suggested that there could be visual sources, but they've only released written ones thus far. So as a consequence, it's reasonable to assume that they're going to be written. I've done some practices with you on previous videos. Go back and check them, and that's perfectly fine. You can pause now and do that if you like. Going to assume you've checked. If you've gone back and you've looked at other videos, you've seen that I've given you some visual ones, and you can have a go at them. If you haven't already, please go back, have a go. You can always submit them. I will always mark them, or rather, your teacher will always mark them. If you submit them in my comments, if you're in my sets, then I will go back and mark them. They go ping when you do that, and I will go back because I don't know. Really, it's just what I do. I can do it very quickly. But yeah. I've given you visual ones. Purpose, what does it mean for you to do? What was the reaction that the creator of the source was hoping for? Message, what's it trying to say? Now, this one's a bit hard. I'm not entirely happy with this being in the mark scheme, but it's there. Message is what it's trying to say. Now, I think the speech from Hitler is fairly obvious in its message. You'll see when you read it. What is that message? How does it work? Can you link it to who said it? Audience, at whom is it aimed? In this one, it's the German people. I'm not sure you're going to get much from it was aimed at the German people when you talk through this. I'm not entirely sure how helpful the audience will be to draw from that. Receipt, that's more helpful. How was this received? How was it seen to be received? And that you need to know a little bit about Weimar Germany. And if you remember at the beginning of the course, we went through an awful lot of background, and I told you needed to know that would never appear in an exam. Well, you don't need to know specifics, but you do need to know a little bit about what German society was like when the Nazis took over. So that's what receipt means here. How do you think people are reacting to this? One student, and I shan't name names, has already done one of these where they told me in detail what German people were thinking. I think it was on the one about where you got all the ranks of the SA standing and looking organized in one of those very early pieces. So here you could talk about that sort of thing, and you can talk about society in Germany, under Weimar Germany, and what their fears and hopes were. Finally, motive. What prompted it to be written? What was the triggering reason? Why do this? Why this speech? Why say these words? Why now and not later? Why not earlier? What's making the source happen like this? What's making them do it? And if you're thinking about that, then you're automatically thinking beyond the source. When I say read between the lines or to infer, this is the sort of thing we mean as historians. Why was the source made? You need to know a great deal about Nazi Germany and German society in order to understand that. 7 marks if this is supported from contextual knowledge. To be fair, I'm not entirely sure how you wouldn't support it from contextual knowledge. All of those things require you to know something about Germany and something about the context of the source. Without that, you cannot do any of those things. And quotes from the source. That's where I think people will fall down. So the thing to watch for, have you given me a quote? Is there something with quotes around it? Doesn't need to be a full sentence, can just be a couple of words. Again, there's a lot to think about here, I know, but it's the first proper test you've had of this. So I'm keen to make sure it makes sense. Question 89 are essays. I've gone through those in a lot of detail when we're talking about the question, but just a reminder how the mark scheme works. There is one difference, and I'll come to that in a moment. Any kind of general narrative, description, or explanation that's not related to the question is level 1, gets you up to 3 marks. Level 2 explains one factor, either for or against, 1 versus 0. Level 3, 2 factors, 2 versus 0, 1 versus 1. Level 4, 3 factors, 3 versus 0, 2 versus 1. And level 5, 4 factors, 4 versus 0, note that, 3 versus 1 or 2 versus 2. When we did the People's Health, and when we will come on to do Vikings, the essays there, you've got to have 2 sides. There is the option in Nazi Germany and Elizabethans that you don't have to have both sides. The tricky part is that that doesn't carry for every question. So we now know in multiple exams that the mark scheme changes based on what the question says. So sometimes the question is an obvious 4-0 answer, and that's acceptable. Other times it isn't. So always look for a second side. As it happens, this one's about terror versus propaganda, and as a consequence, you'll notice that for level 6, it specifically says you've got to cover both sides of the argument. You've got to have a 3 versus 1 or a 2 versus 2 structure. If you were to write a 4 versus 0, no matter how well it was written, you can't get into level 6, and that's interesting. Bear in mind how mark schemes work. If you get an incredibly good level 5, and this is the advice I'm giving as an examiner, if you get an incredibly good level 5, it goes to the top mark of level 5, but then tips over into the bottom mark of level 6. So if you write a brilliant 4 versus 0 essay, where you consistently tell me that one side is more important than the other, you support it consistently and well, you write with a beautiful structure, you have an introduction and you have a conclusion, then you will get enough for 16 out of 18. And to be fair, that's none too shabby. So keep that in mind, but always look to do both sides. With this particular essay, I don't think that's too big an ask, and I think that's reasonably easy to do. So that's the task. And if this were a lesson, I would have spent longer drawing on the board all the things that I've talked through. But I'm kind of hoping that by talking through it as slowly as I have and doing it on a video where you can go backwards and forwards and check out again and go back to it regularly, I'm kind of hoping that I don't need to draw a whiteboard, not least because I don't have one. And I'm hoping that will be enough for you to work on. Any questions? Any at all, connected to the topic, not just, random questions. No, I won't run you a bath, not least because that's weird and safeguarding, and I don't know where you live. Nor do I want to. Any questions about the task? Any questions about history? Why a bath? Oh, I've got young children, they ask that sort of question. You are not. You know what? It was a bad idea. I tried to crack a joke. I shouldn't. I don't have the editing software to get rid of it. I should know better. Any parents watching? I'm so sorry. Anyway, back to the point. Any questions about the task? Any worries about the task? Anything you think I can help you with? Please ask in the comments. All that I ask is that you watch this video carefully and don't just, well, if you are doing what I'm about to say, you're not going to read this bit. So yeah, if you've done the thing where you pause at the point where there's a document on the screen and then look at that and then just go away again, then none of this means anything. If you're not doing that, brilliant, you're doing the right thing. But any questions, do ask. I'll do my level best to help. I can't promise I'll make it all right, but at the very least, I can help with some kind of textual backup and hopefully promptly. Anything else to say? No, I think that's it. So this is our first suite of answers. You've got a 15 marker that you're already doing. Thank you very much, those of you that already handed that in. You've now got a 7 marker and an essay. The essay shouldn't be too hard. It's just different knowledge plugged into a structure you're already aware of and have already used a lot. We just haven't done it for a while because we did the Cromford stuff. So it's slightly different to Cromford. There's a bit more detail involved, and there's a bit more specific information you've got to draw from the course, which actually I think will be more helpful because you can use your notes in a bit more of a sophisticated way. Thank you very much if you have been for watching, and have a lovely day, Year 10. And when the time comes for us to see each other face to face, I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure it'll go well. Stay safe, have a lovely time, and yeah, I'll see you on the next video, or rather you'll see me on the next video. And I am so sorry you've had a haircut.